The rain couldn't wash away the scent of blood. It only made it spread. Nolan Ridge sprinted through the dark, deserted city streets, his tailored charcoal suit ruined. In his arms, he carried a monster. His second-in-command let out a harsh, rattling wheeze. The jagged silver blade buried deep in the silver wolf's ribs burned with a toxic heat. Time was running out. Every step Nolan took splashed through deep puddles, his boots hitting the pavement in a rapid, desperate rhythm. He was an alpha, a man who commanded the city. But all his power and wealth meant zero against the poison coursing through his best friend's veins. He needed a healer, he needed a miracle, and he needed it fast. Up ahead, a single light cut through the storm. A glowing sign hung above a glass storefront, a downtown veterinary clinic. Nolan didn't care that the clock ticked past midnight. He didn't care about locked doors or business hours. He tightened his grip on the dying wolf and charged toward the glass, ready to tear it down to get what he needed. Chapter 1. Brianna scrubbed the steel exam table until her reflection stared back at her. The wall clock ticked past midnight. Rain lashed against the glass storefront of the downtown veterinary clinic. She worked the late shift alone to earn overtime pay. The quiet room offered peace, and she cherished the silence. That peace shattered when the front entrance banged open. The glass panes rattled inside their metal frames. Nolan Ridge burst into the waiting room. He wore a ruined charcoal suit. Dark blood soaked his white dress shirt. His arms carried a giant beast wrapped in a thick wool blanket. The animal let out a harsh, rattling wheeze that echoed through the empty clinic. "We are closed!" Brianna shouted, stepping out of the back room. "The sign clearly says closed." "Fix him!" Nolan roared. His voice shook the clinic windows. He stormed past the front desk, ignoring her rules. He dropped the heavy bundle onto the nearest exam table. Brianna rushed over. She pulled the wool blanket back and let out a sharp gasp. The creature on the table resembled a timber wolf, but it possessed dimensions that defied logic. The beast measured at least 7 feet from snout to tail. Silver fur clumped together with wet blood. "What did you do to this animal?" Brianna demanded. "I did nothing," Nolan snapped. His chest heaved with every breath. "He got attacked. Save him right now." Brianna leaned over the wolf. Her fingers brushed the thick fur, searching for the source of the bleeding. She found a jagged knife hilt sticking out from the animal's ribs. The metal gleamed under the harsh overhead fluorescent lights. It looked like solid silver. "He has a knife in him," Brianna stated. She dropped her voice into a professional calm. "Why didn't you pull it out before you carried him here?" "I cannot touch it," Nolan growled, taking a fast step back. "It burns." Brianna shot him a look of pure disbelief. "It burns? Are you delusional? It is a piece of metal." "Just pull the blade out," Nolan commanded. He slammed his palm against the nearby drywall. Brianna squared her shoulders. She met his furious glare without blinking. "Sit down in that plastic chair and shut your mouth. If you yell in my clinic again, I will call the police. Do you understand me?" Nolan froze. His jaw tightened. Inside his mind, his inner wolf let out a sudden, strange whine. "She has fire," the beast purred. "We like her. Do what she says." Nolan swallowed hard. He fought his own primal instincts. He forced himself to step away from the steel table. He did not sit, but he kept his mouth shut. Brianna turned her attention back to the bleeding wolf. She grabbed a pair of sterile gloves from the wall dispenser and snapped them onto her hands. She snatched heavy forceps from her instrument tray. "Hold on, big guy," Brianna whispered. She kept her tone soft and soothing. The giant wolf whined. His yellow eyes tracked her every movement. "I will get this out of you. Just breathe." She gripped the silver hilt. With one smooth, hard pull, she yanked the blade free. The wolf let out a deep howl that rattled the surgical tools on the tray. Blood welled up from the puncture wound. Brianna tossed the silver knife into a metal waste bin. It hit the bottom with a loud clang. "Hand me the sterile gauze from that counter," she ordered. Nolan grabbed the white squares and shoved them into her palm. Brianna pressed the padding hard against the wound. The wolf whimpered and rested his heavy head against her arm. Brianna stroked the soft fur behind his ears while maintaining pressure on the injury. The sharp scent of copper filled the small room, masking the smell of wet dog. "You are doing great," Brianna murmured to the wolf. She ignored the tall, brooding man standing just a few feet away. Nolan watched her work. His chest tightened. His inner wolf paced in his mind, pouting. She touches him with soft hands. We want the soft hands. Why does the beta get all the attention? Nolan shoved the ridiculous thoughts away. He focused on the steady rhythm of Brianna's hands. She cleaned the edges of the wound. She threaded a curved needle and began placing neat, tight stitches into the thick skin. "Will he live?" Nolan asked. His tone lost the harsh edge from earlier. "He is strong," Brianna replied, tying off a knot. "The blade missed his lungs. He needs rest and antibiotics. But you need to explain why someone stabbed your illegal hybrid dog with a medieval weapon." "He is just a dog," Nolan lied. His expression turned blank. Brianna snorted. She grabbed a bandage roll. "Sure, I do not care about your street fights. I care about the patient. He stays here tonight." Nolan opened his mouth to argue, but the giant wolf let out a soft snore. The beast had fallen asleep, his head resting right against Brianna's hip. "Fine," Nolan muttered. "I will return at dawn." He turned and walked out the door, leaving Brianna alone with the sleeping giant. Chapter 2. The morning sun pushed through the clinic blinds. Brianna rubbed her tired eyes and drank stale coffee from a paper cup. She spent the entire night sitting on a stool next to the large floor enclosure. The giant silver wolf slept through the dark hours without making a sound. Around 7 o'clock, the beast stirred. He let out a long, rumbling yawn that showed off rows of lethal white teeth. Brianna tensed. A wild animal this big could snap her arm in 2 seconds flat. Instead, the wolf rolled onto his back. He kicked his hind legs in the air and let out a high-pitched whine. Brianna blinked. She set her coffee down and opened the metal gate. "Hey there. How is the side feeling?" The wolf scrambled to his feet. He did not growl. He stepped close and pushed his wet nose right into Brianna's palm. Then he licked her wrist. His tail gave a clumsy, heavy thump against the floor mats. "You are just a big softy, aren't you?" Brianna smiled. She scratched the thick fur behind his ears. The wolf leaned his entire heavy body against her legs, nearly knocking her over. He acted like an overgrown golden retriever begging for affection. The front bell jingled. Heavy boots sounded on the linoleum floor. Nolan walked into the back room. He wore a fresh black sweater and dark jeans. He stopped dead in his tracks. His fearsome beta, a ruthless fighter, was currently rolling on the floor while a human woman rubbed his belly. "Get up," Nolan commanded. His voice echoed dark and rough in the small room. The wolf stopped panting. He looked at Nolan. Then he let out a dramatic sigh, rested his chin on Brianna's sneaker, and closed his eyes. Nolan clenched his fists. The disrespect hit him hard. He ran a vast corporate empire. Men bowed to him. Yet his second-in-command refused to listen to a simple order. Brianna stepped away from the enclosure and closed the gate. "Do not yell at him. He is recovering from a major trauma. He needs a calm environment." "He needs to come home," Nolan stated. He pulled a dark leather wallet from his back pocket. "I am taking him right now." "He cannot walk yet," Brianna countered. She crossed her arms over her chest. "The stitches will tear. He stays another 24 hours on strict cage rest." Nolan glared at her. He pulled a sleek, heavy black credit card from the leather folds. The plastic gleamed under the lights. He tossed it onto the reception desk. It landed with a sharp click. "Take this," Nolan ordered. "Charge whatever you want. Add a 0 to the final bill. Buy yourself something nice. In exchange, you keep your mouth shut about the knife wound, and I take my animal home." Brianna stared at the card. The wealth represented by that black plastic could change a person's life. It could wipe away debt and buy security for years. She picked it up. She looked at Nolan's smug face. He expected her to bow down. He expected the cash to win. Gianna flicked her wrist and sent the card sliding right back across the counter. It dropped onto the floor at Nolan's boots. "Keep your dirty money," Brianna said. Her voice dropped into a dangerous calm. Nolan frowned. Confusion replaced the smugness on his face. "Excuse me?" "You heard me, you arrogant jerk," Brianna told him. She leaned over the counter to close the distance between them. "I fix animals because I care about them. I do not take hush money from rich men who treat their pets like disposable toys. You can pay the standard medical fee when he is ready for discharge. Until then, take your plastic and get out of my clinic." Nolan stared at her. Women did not speak to him this way. People did not reject his money. "You have no idea who you are dealing with," Nolan warned. "I am dealing with a man who lacks basic manners," Brianna shot back. She grabbed a spray bottle and a rag. "Visiting hours are over. Leave." Nolan's inner beast roared, but not with anger. The wolf felt a thrilling rush of excitement. She possessed zero fear. She stood her ground against an apex predator without even knowing it. Nolan bent down, grabbed his card, and walked toward the exit. He paused at the door, casting one last look at the woman scrubbing the counter. He would not walk away from this. He wanted her, and he always secured what he wanted. Chapter 3. Brianna finished her double shift at the clinic. Her feet ached inside her sneakers. The sky turned a bruised purple as she walked the 10 blocks back to her apartment. The autumn wind bit her cheeks. Her home sat in an old, crumbling brick building on the edge of the city. It lacked charm, but the cheap rent kept her afloat. As she rounded the corner, she stopped. 3 large moving trucks idled on the street. People rushed in and out of the double-glass doors, carrying cardboard boxes, lamps, and trash bags stuffed with clothes. Brianna jogged up the concrete steps. She found her neighbor, Mrs. Higgins, wrestling a heavy television into the back of a van. "What is happening?" Brianna asked, stepping up to help lift the screen. "Is there a fire?" Mrs. Higgins shook her head. She pulled a thick white envelope from her coat pocket. "No fire, honey. A miracle. Some rich corporate guy bought the building this afternoon. His lawyers showed up an hour ago. They offered everyone $50,000 in cash to pack up and leave by Friday. I am taking the money and moving to Florida." Brianna felt a cold chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the wind. She rushed past Mrs. Higgins and sprinted up the 3 flights of stairs to her floor. The hallway looked like a disaster zone. Doors stood wide open. Neighbors yelled orders at each other. Brianna reached her apartment. A crisp white envelope sat taped to the center of her door. She ripped it off and tore the paper open. Inside rested a typed eviction notice from Ridge Enterprises, demanding she vacate the premises immediately. A cashier's check fell out and fluttered to the floor. She stared at the name at the top of the letterhead. Nolan Ridge, the arrogant jerk from the clinic. "He bought my building," Brianna whispered to the empty hallway. Anger flared in her chest. A sharp physical ache struck her ribs. He thought he could buy her compliance. He thought destroying her home would make her crawl to him and beg for help. She shoved the key into the lock and pushed her door open. She stepped inside and slammed it shut, blocking out the noise of the fleeing tenants. She ripped the cashier's check into 4 pieces and tossed the scraps into the trash can. She would not take a single dime from that man. She would stay right here until the law forced her out. Brianna walked into her small kitchen to make tea. She turned the faucet on, but nothing happened. A hollow clanking sound echoed in the pipes. She twisted the knob harder. Not a single drop of water fell into the sink. Panic started to bubble in her throat. She rushed to the living room and placed her hand flat against the metal radiator. It felt ice cold. The city had shut off the utilities to the building. The other tenants were leaving, and the management company killed the power, the water, and the heat to force out any stragglers. The sun dipped below the horizon, plunging her apartment into total darkness. The temperature inside the room dropped fast. The autumn night crept through the thin window panes. Brianna grabbed her thick red wool blanket from the back of the sofa. She wrapped it tight around her shoulders. She sat on the edge of her mattress in the dark. Her breath plumed in the cold air. She pulled her knees to her chest. She refused to cry. She refused to let Nolan Ridge win. She would survive the night, and tomorrow she would find a new place to live, a place far away from him. But as the hours dragged on, the cold seeped deep into her bones, testing her stubborn resolve. Chapter 4. Brianna woke up shivering. Her joints ached from the freezing temperature. She threw off the red wool blanket and grabbed her phone. The battery showed 10%. She had no electricity to charge it. She needed to move fast. She dragged 2 cheap blue suitcases from her closet and shoved her clothes inside. She dragged them to the front door and left them there. Brianna hit the pavement before the sun fully cleared the city skyline. She walked to a local diner, bought a single cup of black coffee, and scoured the rental ads on her dying phone. She had no car. She needed an apartment within walking distance of the vet clinic. Bus routes took too long, and ride shares drained her tight budget. She circled 3 addresses and started walking. The first apartment sat above a loud, greasy pizza parlor. The landlord, a sweaty man with a stained shirt, unlocked the door. The room smelled like stale grease and mold. The ceiling possessed a large, dark water stain right above the bed. Brianna asked about the rent. The landlord stated a number that made her jaw drop. The broken-down room cost a fortune. She left and walked another 2 miles to the second address. This building looked nicer from the outside. The leasing agent led her to a basement studio. The space lacked windows. The walls squeezed tight together, making the room feel like a concrete box. "How much?" Brianna asked, rubbing her tired legs. The agent quoted a price that equaled 3 of Brianna's monthly paychecks combined. Brianna turned around and walked out without saying another word. By noon, her feet throbbed. She reached the third address. It was a clean, safe building just 4 blocks from the clinic. A shred of hope bloomed in her chest. She met the manager in the lobby. "I want to rent the 1-bedroom unit," Brianna said, leaning against the front desk. "Great," the manager smiled. "We need first month, last month, and a security deposit today, plus a broker fee." Brianna did the math in her head. The total number wiped out her meager savings and dug into money she did not have. She pulled her empty wallet from her pocket. The truth hit her hard. She was completely out of options. Every decent place near her job required a luxury budget. Nolan knew exactly what he was doing. He cornered her. He destroyed her cheap housing, knowing the city would price her out of the neighborhood. Brianna walked out of the building and sat on a concrete bench at the bus stop. Her phone screen flashed a low battery warning and went dark. Defeat washed over her. A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. She hated Nolan Ridge. She hated his power and his arrogance, but she hated the idea of sleeping on the street even more. She stood up. She walked the long, exhausting miles back to her frozen brick building. The hallways sat empty and silent. The movers were gone. Brianna grabbed the handles of her 2 blue suitcases. She dragged them down the stairs. Each thump against the steps sounded like a drumbeat of failure. She walked out the front doors and turned toward the center of the city. She knew exactly where Nolan's company headquarters and private penthouse were located. Everyone in the city did. She dragged her bags block after block. Her arms burned, her pride shattered with every step. But she kept moving forward. She had no choice left. She walked straight into the trap the billionaire set for her. Chapter 5. Brianna dragged her 2 blue suitcases down the concrete sidewalk. The cheap plastic wheels clattered against the cracks in the pavement, sending sharp jolts of pain up her arms. The evening wind whipped across her face. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her chest, fighting the chill. Every step felt like a march toward a prison sentence. She stared up at the Zenith Tower. The sleek glass structure pierced the night sky, standing out among the city blocks. It represented everything Nolan Ridge possessed and everything she lacked. She pushed her bags through the revolving brass doors. Warm air washed over her face, thawing her numb cheeks. The lobby gleamed with polished white marble and gold accents. The concierge eyed her luggage, his gaze tracking the scuff marks on the blue fabric. "Brianna Collins," she stated, her voice cracked from the cold air. "Nolan Ridge expects me." The man nodded, his expression giving nothing away. He pointed to a private elevator tucked into the corner. She grabbed her bags and stepped inside the polished steel box. The doors slid shut, sealing her in. Her stomach twisted into tight, nervous knots. She expected a fight. She prepared her verbal defenses, ready to shut down his gloating. He won the real estate battle. He forced her out of her home, but she refused to let him break her spirit. The elevator chimed a soft bell. The doors opened directly into a sprawling penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering city skyline, a sea of white and yellow light. Dark hardwood floors stretched out across the open living space. Nolan stood by a kitchen island. He wore gray sweatpants and a plain white t-shirt. The billionaire armor was gone. He looked up from a stack of papers. His eyes locked onto her shivering frame. Brianna braced herself for the smirk. She waited for the arrogant comment about her surrender. It never came. Nolan dropped his pen. His gaze swept over her pale face, her chattering teeth, and the tight grip she kept on her luggage handles. The smug victory he felt earlier vanished. A sharp ache hit his chest. He pushed her too far. He saw the exhaustion carved into her posture. "Drop the bags," Nolan instructed. His tone lacked the usual harsh bite. Brianna stayed frozen. "I read the lease terms your lawyers sent. I get a room, I pay rent, we stay out of each other's way." Nolan crossed the room. He did not argue. He reached out and wrapped his large hands over hers, gently prying her frozen fingers off the plastic handles. His skin radiated an intense, comforting heat. "You are freezing. Stop fighting me for 5 minutes." He grabbed the handles of both suitcases. "Follow me." Brianna hesitated, but the promise of warmth drew her forward. He led her down a wide hallway, carrying her bags, and pushed open a solid oak door. The guest bedroom looked like a sanctuary. Navy blue walls created a calm atmosphere. A large bed sat in the center, covered in a thick white duvet. A brass lamp cast a soft, golden glow across the mattress. "The bathroom is through that side door," Nolan told her. "Take a hot shower, put on dry clothes, come to the kitchen when you finish." He turned and left, pulling the door shut behind him. Brianna stood in the quiet room. The silence felt heavy. She expected a villain. Instead, he treated her with actual care. 20 minutes later, Brianna pulled fresh sweatpants and a thick sweater from her blue suitcase. She changed in the bathroom and walked into the kitchen. The scent of roasted chicken and herbs filled the air. Her stomach let out a loud rumble. Nolan set a porcelain bowl on the island counter. Steam rose from the hot broth and shredded meat. He pushed a silver spoon toward her. "Eat," he said. He leaned against the counter, watching her. Brianna picked up the spoon. She took a bite. The rich flavor hit her tongue, and she let out a soft groan of relief. She ate in silence, devouring the meal until the bowl sat empty. She pushed it away, feeling human again. "Thank you," she muttered, staring at the polished wood grain of the counter. "You look for a new place to live tomorrow," Nolan stated, crossing his arms. "But tonight, you rest. No arguments, no negotiations." Brianna met his gaze. The challenge in his eyes was gone, replaced by a strange, quiet protectiveness. She gave a single nod. The battle lines remained drawn, but for tonight, she called a truce. She walked back to the Navy room, crawled under the white duvet, and let sleep claim her. Welcome back to Sera's Werewolf romance collection, where the alphas run the city and the heroines refuse to bow. Quick question for the pack before we unleash today's drama. What is your biggest deal breaker when looking for a new apartment? Let me know in the comments, and drop a paw print emoji if your own dog acts like they pay the rent. Today's story is pure fire. It brings the heat, the laughs, and features a broke veterinary technician who accidentally scolds a billionaire alpha, so he buys her entire building just to force her to move in with him. Before we get to the eviction notices, if you want to support the pack and score early access to all our new audiobooks, hit that join button down below. Your support keeps the microphone on and the fresh stories flowing. Now, grab a hot coffee and settle in. The lease is signed, and this alpha is about to learn that his cash cannot buy a sassy vet tech's obedience. Let's listen. Chapter 6. Morning sunlight spilled across the navy blue walls. Brianna stretched her legs under the duvet and kicked something solid. A deep, vibrating grumble echoed from the foot of the bed. She peeked over the covers. Wyatt lay curled in a giant ball of silver fur, taking up half the mattress. He cracked one yellow eye open, thumped his tail against the sheets, and went back to sleep. Brianna sighed. The giant animal followed her home from the clinic 3 days ago and refused to leave her side. Nolan allowed the beast to stay in the penthouse, claiming the dog needed monitoring. She slid out of bed, careful not to jostle his healing ribs. She opened the bathroom door, eyes half closed. She stepped toward the toilet and stopped. The lid sat wide open. The seat was up. Brianna frowned. She lived alone for years. She never left the seat up. "Nolan," she muttered. She slammed the seat down. The noise echoed off the tiles. She finished her morning routine and marched into the kitchen. Her stomach demanded breakfast. She unzipped her blue suitcase to grab the emergency box of generic oat bars she packed during her apartment hunt. The cardboard flap hung open. She tipped it upside down. Only a shredded silver wrapper fell out. Brianna gripped the empty box. She sealed that box yesterday. Heavy footsteps sounded behind her. Nolan walked into the kitchen wearing dark slacks and a crisp button-down shirt. He poured a cup of black coffee from the machine. "We need to set ground rules," Brianna announced. She slapped the empty yellow box onto the island counter. Nolan raised an eyebrow. "Good morning to you, too. What is the problem?" "The problem is respect for shared spaces," Brianna shot back. She pointed a finger at his chest. "First, you leave the toilet seat up in my bathroom. Second, you eat my cereal in the middle of the night. If you want honey flakes, buy your own with your endless bank account." Nolan stared at her. Confusion twisted his features. "I do not eat cheap sugar cereal, and I have my own bathroom on the other side of the penthouse." "I live with a giant dog and you," Brianna said. "The dog does not use the toilet. The dog does not open cardboard boxes. So unless this luxury tower has ghosts, you are the culprit." Inside Nolan's mind, his inner wolf threw a vicious tantrum. "He is shifting," the beast snarled. "The beta shifts at night to eat her food. Tell her the truth. Punish him." Nolan gritted his teeth. He knew exactly what happened. Wyatt played the injured pet during the day to get Brianna's sympathy. At night, while she slept, the beta shifted back to his human form to raid the pantry and use the plumbing. Nolan could not expose the secret. He took a breath and swallowed his pride. "Fine," Nolan lied. He set his coffee mug down. "I woke up craving sugar. I used your bathroom because mine had a plumbing issue. It will not happen again." Brianna narrowed her eyes, studying his face. "See? Was admitting fault that difficult?" A loud padding sound interrupted them. Wyatt trotted into the kitchen in his wolf form. He sat right next to Brianna's leg. He let out a soft whine and nudged her hand with his wet nose. "Hey, buddy," Brianna cooed. Her sharp tone vanished. She scratched the thick fur behind his ears. "Are you hungry? I would offer you some cereal, but someone ate it all." She shot a glare at Nolan. Wyatt let his tongue loll out in a happy pant. He looked up at his alpha. The giant wolf gave Nolan a smug, satisfied stare. Nolan gripped the edge of the counter. His knuckles turned white. His second-in-command mocked him in his own home. He took the blame for a stolen box of cheap flakes while the thief got morning head scratches. "I will buy you a new box today," Nolan gritted out. "Make it two," Brianna replied. She patted Wyatt's head one last time and walked toward the front door. "I need to get to the clinic. Try not to break any more rules while I am gone." The door clicked shut. Nolan stood in the quiet kitchen. He glared at the silver wolf. "If you eat her food again," Nolan promised, his voice a dangerous rumble, "I will throw you off the balcony." Wyatt let out a noise that sounded exactly like a laugh, turned around, and trotted back to the bedroom for a nap. Chapter 7. Brianna laced up her sneakers in the foyer. The walk to the clinic from the Zenith Tower spanned 3 long miles. The distance meant an hour of marching through the city crowds before her shift even started. She grabbed her thin jacket. "Where are you going?" Nolan asked, stepping out of his home office. "Work," Brianna stated. She pulled the front door open. "My driver is downstairs," Nolan told her, checking his silver wristwatch. "A black sedan is waiting by the curb. Give him the address. He will drop you off." Brianna paused. She pictured pulling up to the vet clinic in a sleek, luxury car. Her coworkers would stare. They would ask questions she refused to answer. She valued her independence. Relying on a billionaire for a ride felt like losing a piece of her pride. "No thanks," Brianna said. "I like the exercise." "It is 3 miles, Nolan argued, stepping closer. "The temperature is dropping. Do not be stubborn just to prove a point." "I do not do chauffeurs," Brianna countered. She met his gaze with a hard look. "I pay for my own life. I transport myself. Good morning, Nolan." She walked out and let the door shut. The walk proved miserable. The winter wind sliced through her clothes. Her feet throbbed by the time she reached the clinic doors. She worked an 8-hour shift on her feet, wrestling heavy dogs and cleaning metal cages. The walk back to the tower that evening drained the last bit of energy from her bones. The next morning, Brianna woke up dreading the commute. Her muscles ached. She dressed in silence, bracing herself for another long march. She rode the elevator down to the main lobby. As the doors parted, she spotted Nolan standing near the concierge desk. He held a simple white helmet in his hands. Next to him stood a vintage green bicycle. The metal frame gleamed with a fresh polish. A sturdy brown leather seat matched the handle grips. A wire basket hung over the front tire. Brianna stopped walking. She stared at the two-wheeler. "What is this?" she asked. Nolan held out the white helmet. "You refuse to use a car. You refuse my money. But I refuse to watch you limp through my front door every evening. I found this at a second-hand shop down the street. It works. It gets you to the clinic faster. You pedal it yourself." Brianna looked from the green bicycle to Nolan's face. She expected a catch. She searched for the arrogant smirk, the usual demand for gratitude. He just looked at her, waiting. He listened to her rules. He did not buy her a sports car or a luxury electric scooter. He found a practical, simple solution that kept her independence intact. The gesture hit her like a warm wave. A profound sense of relief loosened her tight muscles. Brianna stepped forward and took the helmet from his hands. Their fingers brushed. The brief contact sent a strange jolt through her palm. "It has a basket," she noted, keeping her voice steady to hide the sudden flutter in her chest. "For your lunch bag," Nolan replied. He stepped back, giving her space. "The tires are full. The chain is oiled. Have a good shift, Brianna." He turned and walked toward the private elevator. Brianna watched him go. The sharp edges of her anger toward him started to dull. She strapped the white helmet onto her head and wheeled the green bicycle out the brass doors. The crisp pine scent of the morning air filled her lungs. She climbed onto the leather seat and pushed off. The ride to work took 15 minutes. The wind in her hair felt freeing, not punishing. She parked the bike outside the clinic, a genuine smile forming on her lips. Nolan Ridge was a complicated man, and for the first time, she wanted to figure him out. Chapter 8. The bell above the clinic door chimed. Brianna finished her shift, wiped down the front desk, and locked the register. Wyatt sat by the entrance in his wolf form, waiting patiently. He healed fast. The wound in his side closed up, leaving only a patch of shaved fur. "Come on, buddy," Brianna called out. "Let us head home." Wyatt trotted after her. They walked a block down the street and stopped in front of a small pet supply store. Brianna pushed the door open. Wyatt followed her down the aisles, his nose twitching at the smells. Brianna grabbed a bright red rubber bone from the bottom shelf. She gave it a hard squeeze. A loud, sharp squeak echoed through the store. Wyatt's ears perked up. His yellow eyes locked onto the red rubber. He let out a low, excited whine. "You like this?" Brianna laughed. She paid the cashier and handed the toy to the giant wolf. Wyatt snatched it with his teeth, his tail wagging so hard his entire back half shook. An hour later, they sat in the living room of the Zenith Tower. Brianna sat cross-legged on the dark hardwood floor. Wyatt laid on his back, his giant paws kicking the air. He chewed the red rubber bone with intense dedication. Squeak, squeak, squeak. The noise filled the quiet penthouse. Brianna leaned over and rubbed his exposed belly. "Who is a good boy? You are a good boy, yes, you are." Wyatt let out a happy grunt and kicked his right hind leg in pure bliss. The front door clicked open. Nolan stepped inside, tossing his keys into a ceramic bowl. He loosened his tie and walked into the living room. He stopped dead. His ruthless beta, a warrior who struck fear into rival packs across the state, was currently gnawing on a bright red squeaky toy while a human rubbed his stomach. Nolan's inner beast let out a roar of outrage. The disrespect burned his pride. A beta must maintain dignity. A beta must show strength. "What are you doing?" Nolan demanded. Brianna looked up, her hand still buried in silver fur. "We are playing. He loves his new toy." "Squeak!" Wyatt clamped his jaws down harder. "Drop it," Nolan commanded. He infused his voice with the harsh tone of an alpha giving a direct order. Wyatt paused. He looked at Nolan. Then, the giant wolf shifted his gaze to Brianna. He clamped his teeth down again. "Squeak!" Nolan's jaw dropped. The betrayal stung. "I said, drop the toy right now." Brianna frowned at Nolan. She stopped rubbing Wyatt's belly and stood up. "Stop yelling at him! You cannot give a dog a toy and then scream when he plays with it. You have terrible training methods." "He is not a regular dog," Nolan snapped. He pointed a finger at the wolf. "He needs discipline." "He needs a safe home," Brianna corrected him. She stepped between Nolan and the wolf, shielding the animal. "You treat everything like a business deal. You command people and you expect instant obedience. But creatures need patience. Let him enjoy his life." Nolan stared at her fierce expression. She defended a deadly shifter against his own alpha. The absurdity of the situation hit him hard. He wanted to scream. He wanted to shift and show her the truth. But he looked at Wyatt, who chewed the red bone with a smug glint in his yellow eyes, and knew he lost this round. "Fine," Nolan gritted out. He turned toward the hallway. "But if that toy squeaks while I am trying to sleep, I am throwing it off the balcony." "Do not listen to him," Brianna whispered to the wolf as Nolan walked away. "You squeak all you want." Wyatt thumped his tail against the floor and let out one long, loud squeak of agreement. Chapter 9. Brianna pushed her green vintage bicycle onto the sidewalk outside the clinic. She locked the polished metal frame to a parking meter and unclipped her plain white helmet. Nolan's black SUV idled by the curb, the rear hatch popping open to let Wyatt jump out. The giant silver beast padded over and sat on the concrete next to her boots. The morning air carried a sharp chill, but the wolf seemed unbothered by the cold. He leaned his heavy head against her leg. She scratched the thick fur behind his ears, careful to avoid the shaved patch on his side where the silver blade had pierced his skin days ago. "Good boy," Brianna murmured. Wyatt's tail gave a single thump against the pavement. Then his entire body went rigid, his ears pinned flat against his skull. The yellow eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. A deep, vibrating rumble started in his chest. Brianna felt the sound travel through the concrete and up her sneakers. She followed his line of sight. Across the busy downtown street, 3 men stood near a closed newsstand. They wore dark canvas jackets and heavy boots. They ignored the flow of morning commuters. Their eyes stayed locked on the clinic's glass storefront. They stayed perfectly still, watching her. A cold shiver raced down Brianna's spine. The men did not look like standard street toughs. They stood with military precision, shoulders squared, hands resting in their pockets. Wyatt bared his teeth. A vicious snarl ripped from his throat. He stepped in front of Brianna, using his 7-foot frame to shield her from their view. "Hey," Brianna whispered, resting a hand on his back. His muscles felt like coiled steel under the fur. "It is fine. We are going inside." She unlocked the glass door and pulled the wolf into the reception area. The fluorescent lights flickered on, casting a harsh glare over the plastic waiting chairs. Brianna locked the deadbolt behind her. When she glanced out the window, the 3 men were gone. The empty corner offered no answers. By noon, the clinic hummed with standard appointments. Brianna cleaned the steel exam tables and restocked the gauze supply. Wyatt refused to leave the front room. He paced back and forth across the linoleum, his claws clicking a restless rhythm. Every time a customer opened the door, the wolf positioned himself between the entrance and Brianna. The brass bell above the door chimed at 1 o'clock. Nolan strode into the clinic. He wore a sharp charcoal suit that looked entirely out of place next to the metal waste bins and dog food displays. He stopped in the center of the room. His gaze flicked to Wyatt. The two shared a silent exchange. The wolf let out a sharp huff and nudged his snout toward the front windows. Nolan's jaw tightened. "Pack your things," Nolan ordered, turning his attention to Brianna. "You are leaving early." Brianna dropped a stack of clipboards onto the counter. "Excuse me? I have 4 hours left on my shift. I do not answer to you." "Men are watching this building," Nolan stated. He pulled his phone from his inner jacket pocket and typed a fast message. Wyatt caught their scent. They are not local. It is a security risk. "They were just guys standing on a corner," Brianna argued, crossing her arms. "I live in a city. People stand on corners. You cannot dictate my work schedule because you get paranoid." Nolan stepped close to the counter. His scent hit her, a unique, sharp blend of crushed cedar and black pepper. It grounded her racing pulse, much to her annoyance. "I bought the security firm that patrols this block 10 minutes ago," Nolan told her, his voice dropping into a dangerous rumble. "In 30 minutes, a team of guards will stand outside those glass doors. They will install reinforced steel shutters over these windows tonight. Until the work is done, you are going back to the tower." Brianna stared at him. "You bought an entire security firm?" "I protect what belongs in my territory," Nolan replied. He did not blink. The weight of his words hung in the air. He did not say who belonged in his territory, but the fierce intensity in his dark eyes made the answer clear. Brianna opened her mouth to fight him, but Wyatt let out a high-pitched whine. The wolf shoved his cold nose into her palm and pushed her toward the coat rack. The beast wanted to leave. She let out a harsh breath. "Fine, but I am riding my bicycle back." "I will follow in the car," Nolan countered. "Do not argue." She grabbed her thin jacket. She hated his interference, but the memory of the 3 men staring at her sent another chill through her blood. Nolan whistled, and Wyatt trotted out the door to jump into the back of the Billionaire's waiting SUV. Brianna unlocked her green bicycle and pedaled toward the Zenith Tower, her mind racing faster than her tires. Chapter 10. Brianna pushed open the heavy oak door of the penthouse. The scent of roasted garlic and seared meat hit her nose the second she stepped onto the dark hardwood floors. She kicked off her sneakers and left them by the entrance. She walked into the open kitchen. Nolan stood by the stove. He had stripped off his charcoal suit jacket and rolled the sleeves of his white dress shirt up to his elbows. He flipped a thick cut of steak in a cast-iron skillet. Sizzling grease popped in the hot pan. Wyatt trotted past her, grabbed his bright red squeaky toy from the living room rug, and flopped onto the floor. Squeak, squeak. "You cook?" Brianna asked, dropping her keys into the ceramic bowl on the wood grain island. Nolan did not look up from the stove. "I prefer knowing exactly what goes into my food. Sit down. Dinner is almost ready." Brianna climbed onto one of the tall bar stools. She watched him work. He moved with practiced ease, chopping fresh greens and tossing them into a bowl. The arrogant billionaire routine vanished in the kitchen. He looked grounded, human. Nolan plated the food and set a ceramic bowl in front of her. The steak rested on a bed of roasted vegetables. He poured 2 glasses of water and sat on the stool across from her. "Eat," he instructed. Brianna picked up her fork and took a bite. The flavors exploded on her tongue. It beat the generic oat bars she usually ate for dinner by a mile. She chewed, swallowed, and met his gaze. "Thank you," she said. She traced the edge of the ceramic bowl with her thumb. "For the food, and for the security upgrade at the clinic today. I hate admitting when I am scared, but those men, they gave me a bad feeling." Nolan paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. He set it down. The tension returned to his shoulders. "They are rivals. They want something I have. They think watching you will give them leverage." "Why would they think that?" Brianna asked, her heart kicking up a faster rhythm. "I am just the vet tech who fixed your dog." Nolan looked at Wyatt, who chewed happily on the red rubber bone. Then he looked back at Brianna. The air in the kitchen shifted. The space between them felt charged, electric. "They see what I see," Nolan said. His voice dropped low, a gravelly sound that sent a jolt straight to her toes. "A woman who does not back down. A woman who refuses my money, throws my rules back in my face, and still manages to tame a beast." Brianna swallowed hard. The banter died in her throat. Nolan leaned forward over the wood grain island. The distance between them vanished. His natural body heat radiated across the space, wrapping around her. "I am not trying to tame anything," Brianna whispered. Her eyes dropped to his lips. "You already have," Nolan replied. He reached across the counter. His large fingers brushed against her jawline. The touch scorched her skin. Brianna leaned into his hand, her breath hitching. Her mind screamed at her to pull away, to maintain the walls she built, but her body refused to listen. Nolan tilted his head. His gaze darkened. He closed his eyes and moved closer. Brianna parted her lips, anticipating the contact. A sharp, shrill ring shattered the quiet. Nolan's phone vibrated across the kitchen island. The sudden noise made Brianna flinch backwards. The spell broke. Nolan cursed under his breath, a harsh sound of pure frustration. He pulled his hand away and snatched the device from the counter. "Ridge," he barked into the receiver. Brianna stared at her half-empty ceramic bowl, her face burning hot. She gripped her fork tight, trying to steady her shaking hands. They crossed a line tonight. The hostile roommate dynamic was dead, replaced by a fire she had no idea how to control. Nolan ended the call and shoved the phone into his pocket. His expression hardened into a mask of pure ice. "I have to leave," Nolan announced. He grabbed his charcoal jacket from the back of a chair. "Lock the penthouse door. Do not let anyone inside, not even building staff." "What is wrong?" Brianna asked, standing up. "Business," Nolan lied. He strode toward the foyer. "Stay with Wyatt." The heavy door slammed shut, leaving Brianna alone with the giant silver wolf. Wyatt let out a sad whine, his red toy forgotten on the floor. Brianna stared at the closed door, the taste of the almost kiss turning bitter on her tongue. Chapter 11. The next evening, rain slicked the downtown streets. Brianna finished her shift at the clinic. The new security guards patrolled the front glass doors, their presence offering a thin layer of comfort. Brianna locked the register. She grabbed a black trash bag filled with empty medical supply boxes. She needed to toss it in the dumpster before she rode her green bicycle home. She walked to the back of the clinic. The rear exit featured a heavy metal door. Bolted to the brick wall right beside the doorframe hung a bright red metal fire extinguisher. She checked its pressure gauge out of habit. The needle rested in the green zone. She unlatched the deadbolt, pushed the heavy metal door open, and jammed a stray brick against the bottom edge to prop it wide. The damp, cold air of the alley hit her face. Wyatt trotted out behind her, his silver fur bristling in the chill. Brianna chucked the black bag into the open green dumpster. It landed with a dull thud. She turned to go back inside. A heavy boot splashed into a puddle near the mouth of the alley. Brianna froze. The three men from the corner stood blocking the exit to the main street. They wore the same dark canvas jackets. Water dripped from their hair. They did not speak. They just stepped forward, moving in total synchronization. Panic seized Brianna's chest, stealing the oxygen straight from her lungs. She spun around to run the other way. Two more men stepped out from behind a stack of wooden pallets, cutting off her escape route. She was trapped in the narrow corridor of wet brick. Wyatt let out a deafening roar. He did not growl or bark. He roared like a predator ready to kill. The giant wolf shoved Brianna behind him, using his heavy, muscular frame to block the men advancing from the street. "Stay back!" Brianna shouted. Her voice echoed off the brick walls. "The front of this building is covered in guards. I scream and they come running." The man in the center smirked. He cracked his knuckles. "Human guards mean nothing to us. We want the Alpha's pet. Take the beast down." The men charged. They moved with terrifying, unnatural speed. Wyatt met them head-on. He lunged at the first man, his jaws snapping shut on a canvas sleeve. The man let out a shout of pain, but he did not fall. He swung a heavy fist, striking Wyatt hard on the snout. The wolf snarled, shaking the hit off, and tossed the man into the brick wall. The attacker crumpled to the wet pavement, but there were too many of them. The other four men swarmed the silver beast. They fought with savage, brutal coordination. Punches landed on Wyatt's ribs. A boot kicked his hind leg. Brianna watched in horror. This was not a mugging. They wanted to murder her dog to get to Nolan. Wyatt fought like a demon. He threw a second man across the alley, but a third attacker tackled the wolf from the side. The impact sent Wyatt crashing hard against the metal dumpster. The steel groaned under his weight. Wyatt hit the wet asphalt, a sharp whine escaping his throat. He tried to scramble up, his paws slipping on the slick pavement. "No!" Brianna screamed. The center man stepped past the struggling wolf. His dark eyes locked onto Brianna. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a long, curved knife. The blade gleamed under the dim alley light. "You come with us," the man ordered. Brianna backed away, her spine hitting the clinic's exterior brick wall. Her hands scrambled behind her, reaching blindly through the propped-open doorway into the interior hallway. Her fingers brushed the cold, painted cylinder bolted to the indoor drywall, the fire extinguisher. She gripped the red metal neck. She yanked it hard, pulling it free from the interior wall bracket. It weighed a ton, but adrenaline fueled her muscles. She held the heavy cylinder up like a club, ready to swing. She refused to be a victim. Chapter 12. A thunderous crash shattered the noise of the rain. Nolan Ridge dropped from the fire escape 2 stories above. He landed in the center of the alley, cracking the wet asphalt beneath his boots. His charcoal suit jacket flapped in the wind. He did not look like a billionaire CEO. He looked like a god of war. "Get away from her!" Nolan roared. The sound tore through the alley, carrying a terrifying, inhuman bass that made Brianna's bones vibrate. The men spun to face him. The man with the knife sneered. "Ridge, you came to die with your mutt!" Nolan's eyes flashed a brilliant, glowing gold. Brianna gasped, her grip slipping on the red fire extinguisher. Nolan's body jerked. The crisp, white dress shirt tore to shreds. His spine arched, bones snapping and reforming in a sickening, fluid motion. Dark brown fur erupted across his skin. In less than 3 seconds, the man vanished. A monstrous, pitch-black wolf stood in his place. He was larger than Wyatt, radiating pure, lethal power. The attackers did not run. They dropped to their hands and knees, their bodies twisted, clothes ripping apart as they shifted. 5 rival wolves, gray and scarred, snarled at the alpha. Brianna stood frozen against the brick wall, her brain short-circuited. Monsters were real. The arrogant man who bought her bicycle and cooked her steak was a beast. Wyatt was not a dog, he was a shifter. Nolan launched himself at the rival pack. The clash sounded like a freight train collision. Fangs tore into fur, claws scraped against the brick walls. Nolan fought with brutal efficiency, tossing a gray wolf aside and snapping his jaws at another. Wyatt shook off his dizziness. The silver beta jumped back into the fray, fighting side by side with his alpha. They guarded the space in front of Brianna, forming a living wall of teeth and muscle. A gray wolf slipped past Wyatt's guard. The rival beast locked its yellow eyes on Brianna and lunged, its jaws snapping open to bite. Brianna did not scream. Survival instinct overrode her shock. She hoisted the heavy red fire extinguisher over her shoulder. As the gray wolf leaped through the air, Brianna swung the metal cylinder like a baseball bat. The heavy steel connected with the side of the wolf's snout. A loud, wet crack echoed through the alley. The gray beast yelped in agony. The impact spun the creature in midair. It crashed into the puddles, sliding across the slick asphalt. Brianna stood her ground, her chest heaving, holding the dented red extinguisher ready for a second strike. The fallen wolf scrambled to its paws, shaking its bleeding head. It looked at the fierce human woman holding the metal weapon, then looked at the black alpha tearing its packmates apart. The gray wolf tucked its tail and bolted down the street. Seeing their opening vanish, the remaining rivals broke off the attack. They scrambled away, their claws clicking frantically against the pavement as they fled into the city shadows. Silence fell over the alley, broken only by the steady rain and heavy breathing. Wyatt stood near the dumpster, bleeding from a scratch on his shoulder. The giant black wolf turned around to face Brianna. Nolan's golden eyes burned through the dark. The alpha took a step toward her, his head lowering in a gesture of submission. Brianna stared at the monster. She looked at the silver beta. Her hands shook. She let go of the dented red extinguisher. It hit the wet pavement with a heavy, hollow clang. "Change back!" Brianna demanded. Her voice cut through the rain, sharp and unyielding. "Change back right now and tell me the truth." Chapter 13. The rain washed blood into the storm drains. Brianna stood in the damp alley, her chest heaving. The dented red fire extinguisher lay near her soaked boots. She stared at the giant, pitch-black wolf. The beast stood as tall as a horse, glowing golden eyes locked onto hers. "Change back," Brianna repeated, her voice steadying. The black wolf bowed its head. Bones popped and cracked over the sound of the storm. Fur receded into skin. Muscle reshaped itself. Within seconds, a naked, bruised man knelt on the wet asphalt. Nolan Ridge pushed himself up from the puddles. He grabbed his ruined charcoal suit jacket from the ground and wrapped it around his broad shoulders. Water plastered his dark hair to his forehead. Wyatt remained in his silver wolf shape, panting near the green metal dumpster. Blood trickled from a fresh scratch on his shoulder. "You lied to me," Brianna stated. She crossed her arms, shivering in her thin jacket. "I protected my pack," Nolan countered. He stepped closer, his bare chest rising and falling. "Humans hunt us. If I told the truth the night I brought Wyatt to your clinic, you would have called the authorities or run away." "You brought a monster bleeding from a silver knife into my workplace," Brianna fired back. She pointed at the silver beta. "I thought he was a dog, an illegal street fighter. That silver blade, that's why you couldn't touch it. That's why you acted like a lunatic in my waiting room." "Silver burns our flesh. It poisons our blood," Nolan explained. His tone lacked the arrogant billionaire edge. He sounded exhausted. "Wyatt took a hit meant for me. We're shifters. We live in the city, blend into the corporate world, and govern the local territory. The men who attacked you tonight belong to a rival group. They want my resources and my land." Brianna rubbed her temples. The reality of the situation crashed over her. She shared an apartment with werewolves. She scolded an apex predator about leaving the toilet seat up. "You bought my building to trap me," Brianna said, piecing the puzzle together. "You forced me into the Zenith Tower." Nolan didn't flinch. "I needed you safe. You saved my second-in-command. You marked yourself as an ally to my pack. The rivals tracked his blood to your clinic. If you stayed in that run-down brick building, they would have slaughtered you in your sleep." Brianna looked at the alley exit. The city lights blurred through the downpour. She hated his methods. The arrogance of his actions still burned her pride. But she remembered the gray wolf launching itself at her throat. Nolan dropped from the sky to shield her. "I'm a vet tech," Brianna said, her voice hard. "I fix animals. I don't fight supernatural turf wars." "You just bashed a shifter's skull in with a metal cylinder," Nolan pointed out. A faint, genuine smile touched his lips. "You fight just fine." Brianna glanced at the dented fire extinguisher. She survived. She didn't freeze or faint. "We can't stay here," Nolan announced. He whistled to Wyatt. "The rivals will regroup. Grab your bicycle. We're putting it in the back of my SUV. We're going home, and then we're having a very long talk." Brianna nodded once. She accepted the chaotic truth. The rules of her world shattered tonight, but she refused to break with them. Brianna marched to the front of the clinic. The private security guards Nolan hired stood by the reinforced steel shutters, oblivious to the carnage in the back alley. She unlocked her green vintage bicycle from the parking meter. Her hands shook as she gripped the leather handle grips. Nolan's sleek black SUV idled by the curb. The driver popped the rear hatch. Wyatt leaped into the spacious trunk, his silver tail tucking between his legs. Brianna shoved her bicycle in next to the giant beast. She climbed into the passenger seat. Nolan slid behind the steering wheel, his ruined jacket soaking the leather upholstery. He turned the heater on high. Warm air blasted through the vents, thawing Brianna's numb fingers. The drive to the Zenith Tower passed in tense silence. The city glowed under the streetlights, hiding monsters in plain sight. Nolan bypassed the main lobby and drove straight into the underground parking garage. They rode the private steel elevator up to the penthouse. The doors slid open. Brianna stepped onto the dark hardwood floors. She dropped her keys into the ceramic bowl on the wood grain island. The adrenaline faded, leaving a bone-deep ache in her muscles. "I need a hot shower," Brianna declared, walking toward her navy blue guest room. "And then I need you to explain why a grown man steals my oat bars in the middle of the night." Nolan groaned, rubbing his face. The alpha billionaire looked thoroughly defeated. "Wyatt has some explaining to do." Chapter 14. Brianna stood under the scalding spray of the shower until the chill left her bones. She dressed in a pair of clean sweatpants and a long-sleeved shirt from her blue suitcase. She towel-dried her hair and walked back out to the living room. Nolan stood by the kitchen island, wearing fresh gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt. He poured 2 mugs of hot tea. Next to him stood a stranger. Brianna stopped in her tracks. The man was a giant. He stood at least 7 feet tall, his head nearly brushing the modern pendant lights hanging over the counter. He possessed broad, imposing shoulders and thick, muscular arms covered in faded silver scars. He wore a pair of Nolan's sweatpants, which stretched tight across his thighs, and no shirt. His shaggy blonde hair fell into bright, familiar yellow eyes. A fresh, red scratch marked his left shoulder, matching the exact injury the silver wolf sustained in the alley. "You," Brianna breathed out. The giant man offered a sheepish, crooked grin. "Hello, Brianna." His voice rumbled deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Brianna felt the heat rush up her neck and flood her cheeks. Her face turned bright crimson. "I bought you a bright red squeaky toy," Brianna blurted out, covering her face with her hands. "I rubbed your belly. I called you a good boy." Nolan snorted, taking a sip of his tea. "I tried to tell you he needed discipline." "You let me buy him a rubber bone," Brianna yelled, dropping her hands to glare at the alpha. "You let me treat a grown man like a golden retriever." Wyatt chuckled, the sound vibrating through the spacious room. "I liked the belly rubs, and the toy is great for stress. Don't blame Nolan. I refused to shift back. You saved my life. You pulled that burning silver blade out of my ribs when I thought I was dead. I wanted to stay close to protect you." Brianna stared at the huge beta. She remembered the nights he slept at the foot of her bed. She remembered the missing oat bars. "You stole my breakfast food," she accused, pointing a finger at his chest. "Wolf metabolism burns fast," Wyatt shrugged, unapologetic. "I got hungry." Brianna let out a long, exhausted breath. She walked to the island and took the mug of tea Nolan offered. She drank the warm liquid, letting the reality settle. The terrifying shifter who ripped men apart in a damp brick alley was just a loyal friend protecting his savior. Wyatt stepped around the wood-grain island. He approached her with slow, deliberate steps, ensuring he didn't crowd her space. The playful demeanor vanished, replaced by the lethal seriousness of a warrior. He dropped to one knee on the dark hardwood floor. The sheer size of the man made the gesture staggering. "Wyatt, what are you doing?" Nolan asked, his tone hardening with alpha authority. Wyatt ignored his boss. He looked up at Brianna, his yellow eyes burning with pure conviction. "You stood your ground against a rival pack. You wielded a metal cylinder to save my alpha and protect my flank. You pulled silver from my flesh without hesitation. I owe you my life, Brianna Collins. From this night forward, I'm your personal guard. My claws are your claws. Where you go, I go." Brianna stood speechless. A 7-foot-tall killing machine just pledged eternal loyalty to a broke veterinary technician. "Get off the floor," Nolan ordered. Jealousy laced his gravelly voice. His inner beast hated another male claiming devotion to the woman in his territory. "She doesn't need a personal guard. I protect this penthouse." "You run a business empire," Wyatt fired back, standing up to face his alpha. He didn't back down. "You have meetings. I have nothing but time. I guard Brianna." "I'm right here," Brianna interrupted, slamming her ceramic mug down onto the counter. The loud clatter silenced both men. "I'm not a piece of territory. I make my own choices. Wyatt, thank you. I appreciate the backup, but I don't need a bodyguard shadowing me 24/7. "I'll keep a polite distance," Wyatt promised, a hint of the playful puppy returning to his grin. Brianna rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Just put a shirt on, and no more stealing my food." Wyatt bowed his head in a respectful nod. He walked toward the guest hallway. Brianna watched him leave, her mind spinning. She turned to Nolan. The billionaire crossed his arms, his jaw tight with unspoken frustration. "He's right about one thing," Nolan stated. "The Zenith Tower is a fortress, but it's an isolated one. The rivals know you live here now. Tomorrow morning, we leave the city." "Leave the city? Where are we going?" Brianna asked. "The pack grounds," Nolan replied. "My territory in the mountains. It's the only place I can guarantee your safety until I eliminate this threat." Chapter 15. Nolan's black SUV tires crunched over the gravel driveway. The city skyline vanished hours ago, replaced by towering pine trees and dense mountain mist. Brianna sat in the passenger seat, watching the remote landscape roll past. Wyatt rode in the back, fully clothed in emergency denim and flannel pulled from a duffel bag in the SUV's trunk, humming a cheerful tune. They passed through a towering iron gate. The pack grounds sprawled across a hidden valley. Sturdy log cabins dotted the hillside, surrounding a huge central lodge built from dark timber and river stone. People walked along dirt paths, carrying firewood or working on vehicles. They looked like an ordinary rural community, but Brianna knew the truth. Every single person possessed a lethal inner beast. Nolan parked the SUV near the main lodge. As Brianna stepped out into the crisp mountain air, the chatter in the compound died. Dozens of eyes turned to stare at her. The atmosphere grew thick with suspicion. "Stay close," Nolan instructed. He didn't touch her, but his presence formed a protective shield. An older woman with silver hair and sharp brown eyes stepped off the lodge porch. She wore a thick wool sweater and held a wooden walking stick. "Alpha," the woman greeted, dipping her head. She turned her piercing gaze to Brianna. "You brought a human into the sanctuary. The scent of the city clings to her. This violates our oldest laws." "This is Brianna Collins," Nolan announced, projecting his voice so the gathered pack members could hear. "She saved Wyatt's life. She fought beside us in the alley. She stays under my protection." Mutters rippled through the crowd. A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward. "She's a vulnerability, Nolan. The rivals will track her here. We can't risk our families for a human who doesn't understand our ways." Brianna felt her temper flare. She hated being talked about like a piece of broken luggage. She stepped past Nolan, ignoring the warning growl vibrating in Wyatt's chest. "I understand more than you think," Brianna told the broad-shouldered man. "I didn't ask to be dragged into your war, but I'm here, and I pull my own weight. I don't hide behind anyone." Before the man could argue, a distressed cry cut through the tension. A young woman rushed out of a nearby cabin. She clutched a small bundle of blankets to her chest. Tears streamed down her face. "Martha, please!" the young woman cried, running toward the silver-haired elder. "He's burning up! He won't nurse!" Martha rushed forward, pulling the blanket back. A tiny shifter pup, trapped in its half-wolf shape, whimpered in agony. Its fur clumped with sweat. "The fever is too high," Martha whispered, panic bleeding into her calm demeanor. "Our healer is 3 hours away gathering supplies." Brianna didn't hesitate. The instinct to save an animal overrode her fear of the hostile crowd. She sprinted to the back of the SUV and popped the hatch. She grabbed her heavy black veterinary bag. She pushed through the crowd of shifters. They parted, shocked by her bold movement. Brianna dropped to her knees beside the frantic mother. "Let me see him," Brianna ordered. Her voice held the unquestionable authority of a medical professional. The mother hesitated, looking at Nolan. The alpha gave a firm, reassuring nod. The woman laid the shivering pup on the grass. Brianna opened her bag. She pulled out a digital thermometer and a small penlight. She checked the pup's vitals. The breathing sounded shallow and raspy. She checked the gums. They were pale. "He ingested something toxic," Brianna diagnosed, working fast. Her hands remained steady. "Has he been near the Eastern Ridge, where the nightshade grows?" The mother gasped. "Yes, he played there yesterday." Brianna grabbed a bottle of activated charcoal and a specialized syringe from her bag. "I need to flush his system. Hold his head still." For the next 20 minutes, the entire werewolf pack stood in total silence. They watched a human woman fight for the life of their youngest member. Brianna worked with relentless focus. She administered the charcoal, hydrated the pup with a subcutaneous fluid drip, and monitored his crashing temperature. Slowly, the violent shivering stopped. The pup let out a soft, tired sigh and curled into a tight ball. His breathing leveled out, deep and steady. Brianna wiped sweat from her forehead. She packed her tools away and zipped the black bag shut. She looked up at the mother. "Keep him hydrated. He'll sleep for a day, but the toxin is out. He'll survive." The young woman collapsed forward, wrapping her arms around Brianna in a crushing hug. "Thank you so much." Brianna patted her back, feeling awkward but relieved. When she stood up, the atmosphere in the compound had shifted completely. The suspicion vanished. The broad-shouldered man who insulted her earlier stepped forward. He placed his right fist over his heart and bowed his head. One by one, the rest of the pack followed the gesture. It was a sign of profound respect. Wyatt grinned, leaning against the SUV. Nolan watched her, his golden eyes filled with burning pride. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She earned her place. Chapter 16. The sun dipped behind the mountain peaks, painting the sky in vibrant shades of orange and violet. Brianna stood on the wooden deck of the private cabin Nolan assigned to her. The rustic structure sat on a ridge overlooking the sprawling valley. The sounds of the pack settling in for the night drifted up the hill, laughter, the clatter of dishes, and the occasional distant howl. She leaned against the wooden railing. The events of the past week felt like a fever dream. She lost her home, moved into a luxury tower, discovered monsters existed, and saved a werewolf pup from poisoning. Footsteps sounded on the wooden stairs. Nolan walked up to the deck. He wore dark jeans and a simple black sweater that clung to his broad chest. He didn't carry a phone. He didn't wear his expensive silver wristwatch. He looked completely separated from his billionaire persona. Nolan stopped beside her. He rested his hands on the railing. He didn't speak right away, letting the quiet mountain air settle between them. "The pup ate a full bowl of broth an hour ago." Nolan broke the silence. His voice sounded smooth, lacking the harsh edge of command. "The healer checked him. She said your work was flawless." "I just did my job," Brianna replied, watching the sunset. "I treat every patient the same, whether they have paws or hands." Nolan turned to face her. "You gained their loyalty today. That isn't an easy task. Shifters respect actions, not words." "And what do you respect?" Brianna challenged, turning her head to meet his dark gaze. Nolan reached into his sweater pocket. He pulled out a single, vibrant yellow blossom. The petals looked soft like velvet. A sweet citrus scent instantly filled the space between them, masking the pine and dirt of the woods. It was a refreshing, bright fragrance. "I visited the greenhouse behind the main lodge this afternoon," Nolan explained. He offered the flower to her. "It's a sun lily. They only bloom for 3 days out of the year." Brianna hesitated. She remembered the black credit card he tossed on her clinic counter. She remembered the eviction notice wrapped around a cashier's check. "Did you buy this?" Brianna asked, her tone cautious. "No," Nolan said softly. "I grew it in the dirt with my own hands. I planted the seeds months ago." Brianna reached out and took the delicate flower. She brushed the velvet petals against her thumb. The sweet citrus scent brought a genuine smile to her face. It was the first gift he offered that possessed real, thought-out value instead of a price tag. "I'm used to throwing wealth at problems," Nolan admitted, his dark eyes searching her face. "When I wanted you, I tried to buy your compliance. I tried to trap you in my world. It was arrogant and it was wrong. You proved that my money means nothing to you." "I don't care about penthouse suites or luxury cars," Brianna told him, holding the yellow blossom near her chest. "I care about honesty. I care about respect." "I respect you more than anyone I have ever met," Nolan confessed. He took a step closer. The heat radiating from his body warmed the cool mountain breeze. "I watched you face down a rival pack with a fire extinguisher. I watched you save my beta. I watched you heal a child of my pack today. You don't need my money, Brianna, but I need you." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. The domineering alpha stripped away his armor. He laid his pride bare on the wooden deck. Brianna looked up at him. The distance between them vanished. The vibrant heat of his skin countered the sweet citrus of the sun lily. Her heart hammered a rapid, heavy rhythm against her ribs. She didn't step back. She tilted her chin up. Nolan reached out. His large hand gently cupped her jaw. His thumb brushed along her cheekbone. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight down her spine. He waited, giving her the choice, giving her the power. Brianna closed the final inch. She pressed her lips against his. The kiss started slow, a tender exploration of boundaries. But the second their lips met, the spark ignited into a roaring fire. Nolan groaned, a deep, primal sound that vibrated in his chest. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. Brianna dropped the flower. She tangled her fingers into his dark hair, kissing him back with equal, desperate heat. He tasted like rain and danger. The kiss wiped away the anger and the arguments. It was a surrender from both sides, an equal match of fire and stubborn will. When they finally broke apart for air, Brianna rested her forehead against his chest. She listened to the thundering beat of his heart. The war with the rival pack still loomed on the horizon, but standing on the mountain ridge, Brianna knew she was exactly where she belonged. Chapter 17. The peace of the mountain sanctuary did not last. 2 days after the kiss on the wooden deck, Nolan's phone vibrated with a priority alert. The rival pack attacked a downtown supply warehouse belonging to Ridge Enterprises. The message was clear. The war was no longer confined to the shadows, it was bleeding into the city streets. Nolan needed to command his forces from the center of his territory. They packed the black SUV in record time. Brianna loaded her blue suitcases and the green vintage bicycle into the rear hatch. The drive back to the city skyline felt entirely different from their escape. The air inside the cabin hummed with a sharp, dangerous tension. Wyatt sat in the back seat, his jaw set, scanning the tree line for ambushes. Nolan kept both hands tight on the leather steering wheel. His golden eyes tracked every vehicle that merged onto the highway. They bypassed the vet clinic and drove straight to the Zenith Tower. The underground parking garage echoed with the slam of the SUV doors. They rode the private steel elevator in silence. The familiar chime signaled their arrival at the penthouse. The heavy oak doors slid open. Brianna stepped onto the dark hardwood floors, dropping her keys into the ceramic bowl on the wood grain island. Everything looked untouched. The city lights sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Check the perimeter," Nolan ordered. Wyatt nodded. He strode down the hallway, checking the guest rooms and the master suite. Brianna walked toward the kitchen to grab a glass of water. She stopped cold. A sleek black box sat in the dead center of the kitchen island. It lacked postage or shipping labels. "Nolan!" Brianna called out. A cold spike of dread pierced her chest. Nolan crossed the room in 3 long strides. He stared at the black cardboard. The scent of Garrett's pack hung in the air, a foul mix of wet earth and rust. Knowing the rival Alpha's deadly traps, Nolan refused to touch the unknown package bare-handed. He pulled a thick leather oven mitt from the kitchen drawer. He slid his hand into the protective gear and flicked the lid of the box open. Inside lay a gleaming silver combat knife. Its jagged edge rested against a printed photograph. Brianna leaned closer. Her stomach dropped. The photograph showed her standing outside the clinic, unlocking her green bicycle. A red circle was drawn around her face in thick marker. Beneath the photo, a single line of text was scrawled on a torn piece of paper. "I know your weak point. Surrender the territory or she bleeds." "Garrett," Nolan growled. The name tore from his throat with visceral hatred. The rival Alpha. Nolan slammed the lid shut. He tossed the black box into the metal trash bin. The silver blade clattered against the stainless steel sides. He ripped the oven mitt off and threw it onto the counter. "Computer, initiate protocol lockdown," Nolan commanded the room. A mechanized hum vibrated through the floorboards. Thick, reinforced steel shutters descended over the floor-to-ceiling windows, sealing out the city lights. The penthouse plunged into shadows before the ambient ceiling lights flickered on, casting a harsh, artificial glow over the living space. Heavy magnetic locks engaged on the front door with a loud, final click. "We are sealed in," Nolan announced, turning to face her. "Nobody enters, nobody leaves." Brianna stared at the steel walls trapping them inside. The reality of the threat crashed over her. Garrett tracked her routine. He watched her at the clinic. He knew she mattered to the Alpha of the city pack, and he intended to use her as bait. "You can't keep me in a vault," Brianna argued, her voice tight. "I have a job. I have a life outside these metal walls." "Your life is the target," Nolan fired back. He closed the distance between them, his chest heaving. The scent of crushed cedar spiked in the room. "Garrett wants my land. He knows I will burn the city down before I give it to him. But he sees you. He knows my inner beast claims you. If he gets his hands on you, he holds all the leverage." "Then we fight him," Brianna insisted. She refused to cower. "I stood in an alley and swung a fire extinguisher at a wolf. I am not a fragile piece of glass." "You are human!" Nolan roared, his controls slipping. His eyes flashed brilliant gold. "One swipe of their claws will end you. You stay in this penthouse where Wyatt and I can guard you." "A cage is still a cage, even if you put a velvet couch in it," Brianna shot back, pointing at the living room. "I will not wait in the dark for a monster to kick the door down." Wyatt walked back into the kitchen. The giant beta looked between the furious alpha and the stubborn vet tech. "She has a point, Nolan," Wyatt rumbled. "If Garrett breaches this tower, she needs to know how to survive the crossfire. Hiding is not a strategy, it is a delay." Nolan glared at his second-in-command. The tension crackled in the air, thick and suffocating. Nolan looked at the steel shutters, then back at Brianna. The fierce defiance in her eyes mirrored his own stubborn nature. He let out a harsh breath, yielding to the logic. "Fine," Nolan gritted out. "Tomorrow at dawn we go to the gym. We teach you how to survive." Chapter 18. Dawn brought no sunlight into the locked penthouse. The steel shutters kept the rooms buried in artificial twilight. Brianna stood in the center of Nolan's private gym. The space featured padded floor mats, a row of heavy punching bags, and mirrored walls. She wore her gray sweatpants and a tight black tank top, her hair pulled into a high, secure ponytail. Nolan and Wyatt walked into the room. The alpha carried a small black case. He set it on a wooden bench and snapped the latches open. Brianna walked over. Inside the velvet lining rested a compact, black, rubberized device. 2 sharp metal prongs stuck out from the top. "A stun gun," Brianna noted. "Military grade," Nolan corrected. He picked the weapon up. "It delivers 50,000 volts. It runs on a high-capacity lithium battery. One solid hit to the neck or chest will drop a shifter in their human form. It will paralyze a wolf long enough for you to run." He handed the weapon to her. The rubber grip fit perfectly in her palm. It felt substantial, a solid block of defense against the nightmares hunting her. "It only works in close quarters," Wyatt chimed in. The giant beta wore padded sparring gloves. "You have to let them get within arm's reach. That requires nerve." "Show me," Brianna demanded. She clicked the safety switch off. A bright blue arc of electricity snapped between the metal prongs, buzzing with a loud, angry crackle. Nolan stepped back. "Wyatt is your target. Aim for the major nerve clusters, the side of the neck, the center of the chest, or the inner thigh. If you hit thick fur on the back or shoulders, the voltage disperses. You waste your shot." Wyatt stepped onto the center mat. He kept his human shape, his broad shoulders squared. "I am going to rush you. Do not freeze. Step off the center line and thrust the prongs forward." Brianna nodded. She tightened her grip on the rubber handle. Wyatt lunged. He moved with that terrifying, unnatural speed she witnessed in the alley. He closed the 10-foot gap in a blink. Brianna panicked. She stepped backward instead of sideways. Her heel caught the edge of a floor mat. She stumbled, her arms flailing. Wyatt stopped his momentum instantly, catching her by the elbow before she hit the floor. "Dead," Wyatt stated, his tone flat. "If I were a rival, my jaws would be around your throat. Never step straight back. You cannot outrun a wolf. You pivot." Brianna gritted her teeth. Frustration burned hot in her chest. She shoved herself upright and reset her stance. "Again." For the next 3 hours, they ran the drill. Wyatt rushed her from different angles. He threw padded hooks and sweeping kicks. Brianna learned to read the shift in his shoulders before he moved. She practiced pivoting on her lead foot, twisting her torso out of the danger zone and driving the unpowered stun gun into his neck. Sweat drenched her tank top. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her lungs burned for air. But she refused to quit. Every time Wyatt called a hit, she forced herself back to the starting position. Nolan watched from the sidelines. His jaw remained locked tight. Every time Wyatt rushed her, the alpha's inner beast snarled, hating the simulated violence. He wanted to wrap her in steel and keep her safe, but he forced himself to watch. He knew her survival depended on this muscle memory. "Good," Nolan barked, stepping onto the mat. "Take a break." Brianna dropped her hands, gasping for air. She walked to the bench and grabbed a plastic water bottle. She drained half the water in one long gulp. Nolan grabbed a towel and tossed it to her. She caught it and wiped her face. "You favor your right side," Nolan pointed out, stepping close. He reached out, adjusting her left shoulder. "Garrett is smart. If he attacks, he will notice your dominant side. You need to hold the weapon in your left hand for the next hour." Brianna let out a groan. "My left arm feels like wet noodles." "Your life does not care if you are tired," Nolan replied, his voice rough. He looked down at her flushed face. The harsh instructor facade cracked. He reached out and brushed a damp strand of hair behind her ear. "You are doing incredible, Brianna. But Garrett plays dirty. He uses numbers. He uses fear." "I am not afraid," Brianna whispered, looking into his golden eyes. "You should be," Nolan countered. "Fear keeps you sharp. It keeps you alive." Wyatt cleared his throat from the center mat. "If the romance moment is over, we have 10 more drills to run. Switch hands, Brianna. Let us go." Brianna offered Nolan a fierce, determined smile. She switched the heavy rubber grip to her left hand, rolled her shoulders, and stepped back onto the mat. Chapter 19. Midnight cloaked the city. The Zenith Tower stood silent under the dark sky. Brianna lay awake in the navy blue guest room. The stun gun sat on the nightstand, resting inches from her fingertips. She stared at the ceiling, her exhausted muscles twitching from the brutal training session. The digital clock glowed 2:14 a.m. A sudden jarring click echoed through the walls. The hum of the central air conditioning died. The digital clock blinked out. Complete, suffocating darkness swallowed the room. A second later, the low-voltage emergency lights flickered on, bathing the hallway in an eerie, blood-red glow. Brianna shot out of bed. She grabbed the black stun gun and flicked the safety off. She sprinted into the living room. Nolan and Wyatt already stood near the kitchen island. Nolan wore dark sweatpants. Wyatt stood bare-chested. Both men stared at the heavy oak front door. The magnetic locks remained engaged, but the electronic security panel flashed a warning error. "They cut the main power line to the building," Nolan growled. His golden eyes glowed in the dim red light. "The backup generators failed. They sabotaged the grid." "How many?" Wyatt asked, his claws extending from his fingertips. Nolan tilted his head, listening to sounds Brianna could not hear. "I smell 5. In the elevator shaft. They are climbing the cables." Brianna tightened her grip on the rubber weapon. Her pulse hammered against her ribs. The war arrived at their doorstep. Heavy, muffled thuds echoed from the hallway outside. The rival pack reached the top floor. Silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. Crash! A brutal force slammed into the heavy oak front door. The impact shook the penthouse walls. Crash! The thick wood bowed inward. The metal hinges screamed under the pressure. Crash! The door gave way. The heavy oak panel blasted off its hinges, splintering the wooden frame into jagged shards. The door slammed onto the dark hardwood floor, sending a shower of sharp splinters across the room. The entrance gaped wide open. It could never be closed again. 3 enormous wolves charged through the ruined doorway, 2 gray beasts and 1 rust-colored monster. Their jaws snapped, dripping saliva onto the floorboards. Nolan and Wyatt did not hesitate. Bones cracked, muscle tore. The 2 men shifted in midair, meeting the invaders head-on. Nolan's pitch-black wolf form tackled the rust-colored beast, sending them crashing into the kitchen island. The wood grain counter splintered. A ceramic bowl shattered on the floor, sending white shards flying across the tiles. Wyatt grabbed the first gray wolf by the throat, wrestling the creature toward the floor-to-ceiling steel shutters. The sound of snarling beasts and breaking furniture filled the penthouse. Brianna backed up, keeping her eyes scanning the chaos. She stayed light on her feet, remembering her training. A 4th wolf, smaller and leaner than the rest, slipped through the broken doorframe. It bypassed the main brawl. its dark eyes locked onto Brianna. The beast stalked toward her, stepping over the shattered wood. Brianna did not freeze. She pivoted on her lead foot, stepping off the center line. The gray wolf lunged, jaws snapping for her thigh. Brianna sidestepped the attack. She thrust her left hand forward, driving the metal prongs of the stun gun directly into the exposed skin under the wolf's jawline. She squeezed the trigger. 50,000 volts of electricity surged through the beast. A loud, sharp crackle echoed over the growls. The wolf convulsed, its jaws clamped shut on empty air. The creature let out a high-pitched yelp, its legs giving out. It dropped to the hardwood floor, muscles twitching violently, paralyzed by the current. Brianna backed away, breathing hard, keeping the weapon raised. She took a wolf down. Across the room, Nolan grabbed the rust-colored wolf by the scruff, lifting the beast and hurling it against the wall. Wyatt pinned his opponent, his jaws clamping down on a gray shoulder. The city alpha and his beta dominated the fight, fueled by rage and territorial instinct. But the ambush relied on distraction. Heavy boots crunched on the splintered wood of the doorway. A tall man walked into the penthouse. He did not bother shifting into a wolf. He wore a dark leather trench coat. His hands were covered in thick, reinforced leather mechanic gloves. Garrett. The rival alpha surveyed the chaotic brawl. His cold, dark eyes found Brianna standing near the hallway. He smiled. He drew a long, curved combat knife from his belt. The silver blade caught the red emergency lighting. Nolan saw him. The black wolf abandoned his fight, turning to launch himself at Garrett. But two more gray wolves poured through the broken doorframe, tackling Nolan mid-leap. They pinned the black alpha to the floor, burying him under a mountain of teeth and fur. "Nolan!" Brianna screamed. Garrett moved with impossible speed. He crossed the room before Brianna could raise the stun gun. He slapped the weapon from her hand. It skittered across the floorboards. Garrett grabbed Brianna by her ponytail, yanking her head back. He pressed the cold edge of the silver knife directly against her throat. The thick leather gloves protected his skin from the burning metal. "Call them off!" Garrett shouted over the noise, his voice echoing with brutal authority. "Or I open her veins right now!" Chapter 20. The fighting stopped instantly. Wyatt released his grip on the gray wolf, freezing in place. The wolves pinning Nolan backed away, their heads lowered. The black alpha scrambled to his paws. He stood 10 feet away, his chest heaving, his golden eyes locked on the silver blade pressed against Brianna's skin. A low, vibrating growl ripped from Nolan's throat. The bond between them transmitted her pure terror straight into his mind. Her fear tasted like ash on his tongue. He wanted to rip Garrett's head from his shoulders, but the silver edge rested a millimeter from her carotid artery. One flinch, and she died. "Drop the beast forms," Garrett ordered, tightening his grip on Brianna's hair. She let out a sharp gasp of pain, rising to her tiptoes to ease the pulling. Nolan and Wyatt shifted back to human form. They stood bare-chested amidst the ruined furniture and splintered wood. Nolan's fists shook with repressed rage. "You coward," Nolan spat. "Fight me. Let the human go." "This is not a duel, Ridge. This is a hostile takeover," Garrett smirked. He dragged Brianna backward toward the shattered doorway. Her boots scraped against the dark hardwood floor. "I take your weakness. You surrender the city territory deeds by dawn, or I send her back in pieces." Garrett dragged her over the jagged splinters of the broken doorframe. Brianna's boots caught the broken wood, but Garrett's brute strength hauled her into the dim hallway. "Nolan!" Brianna choked out, her hands gripping Garrett's thick leather gloves, trying to pull the silver blade away. "I will find you!" Nolan roared, rushing forward. The remaining rival wolves leaped to block the doorway, forming a barricade of fur and snapping teeth. Nolan crashed into them, his fists flying, but the delay cost him the pursuit. Garrett dragged Brianna down the emergency stairwell. They descended 6 flights in a chaotic, stumbling rush. The silver blade never left her neck. Brianna's lungs burned. She scanned the concrete stairs for a weapon, a fire extinguisher, a loose pipe, anything. But the stairwell remained empty. They burst through the ground floor exit into a dark alley. A rusted black utility van idled near the dumpsters. The sliding side door sat wide open. Garrett shoved her forward. Brianna tripped over the curb and crashed hard onto the ribbed metal floor of the van. Before she could scramble back up, Garrett jumped in behind her. He slammed the heavy door shut, plunging the back of the van into total darkness. The engine roared. The tires squealed as the vehicle peeled out of the alley, throwing Brianna against the cold metal wall. "Tire hands!" Garrett ordered from the front passenger seat. Rough hands grabbed Brianna in the dark. A shifter bound her wrists behind her back using thick, coarse nylon rope. They pulled the knots tight, biting into her skin. Brianna gritted her teeth, refusing to scream. She pushed her panic down. "Fear keeps you sharp." Nolan's words echoed in her mind. The van drove for 20 agonizing minutes. It hit potholes and sharp turns, throwing her battered body across the metal floor. Finally, the vehicle lurched to a halt. The doors flew open. Cold, damp air rushed in. The scent of stale blood, wet concrete, and old rust filled her nose. A rival shifter hauled her out of the van by her bound arms. They marched her into an abandoned meatpacking warehouse. Rows of rusted iron meat hooks hung from automated ceiling tracks. The concrete floor sloped toward central drainage grates. The vast, empty space echoed with the dripping of unseen water. They forced her into a heavy metal chair bolted to the center of the floor. Garrett stepped forward holding another length of nylon rope. He secured her torso to the chair back, wrapping the thick cord around her chest and tying it off. Garrett pulled up a wooden crate and sat directly in front of her. He removed his thick leather gloves, tossing them onto the concrete. "He will come for you," Garrett said, studying her face. "He is predictable. An alpha driven by his beast makes mistakes. He will rush the doors, my pack will kill his beta, and I will take the city." "He is not predictable," Brianna told Garrett, keeping her voice steady to mask her racing heart. She stared the rival alpha dead in the eyes. "He is ruthless, and he does not lose." Garrett laughed, a cold, grating sound. He stood up and walked toward the front entrance to position his guards, leaving her alone in the center of the kill zone. Brianna stopped waiting to be rescued. She prepared to set her own trap. Chapter 21. Brianna sat bolted to the center of the dark meatpacking warehouse. The coarse nylon rope bit into her wrists. Garrett's guards paced near the front entrance, their boots echoing across the sloped concrete floor. Water dripped from the ceiling, splashing into the rusted drainage grates. The scent of stale blood and wet iron filled the cavernous room. She surveyed the area. 10 feet to her left, a rusted metal work table sat covered in discarded junk. Among the debris rested a shattered glass bottle. Brianna needed that sharp edge. She tested the binding, securing her chest to the heavy iron chair. Garrett tied the knots tight, but the nylon possessed a tiny amount of stretch. Brianna exhaled, forcing all the oxygen from her lungs to shrink her ribcage. She twisted her shoulders, wiggling her torso upward. The rough rope scraped her skin, burning a red line across her collarbone. She ignored the pain. She pushed her shoulders forward, rolling the nylon loop over her head. The rope dropped to her waist. Her torso was free. Her wrists remained bound behind her back. Brianna stretched her right leg out. Her boot hit the rusted leg of the metal work table. She hooked the toe of her boot around the iron strut and pulled. The table shrieked against the concrete, vibrating with a harsh, grating screech. The guards near the door paused. "What was that noise?" a rough voice called out in the dark. Brianna froze. She let her chin drop to her chest, closing her eyes. Heavy footsteps approached. A guard walked into the center circle, his nose twitching as he sniffed the cold air. He stared at her limp form, let out a dismissive grunt, and walked back toward the entrance to join his partner. Brianna opened her eyes. She stretched her leg out again. She kicked the edge of the table frame. A jagged piece of the shattered glass bottle vibrated off the flat surface and plummeted to the floor. It shattered into smaller, sharp pieces near the toe of her boot. Brianna slid her body sideways off the metal chair seat. She crouched on the wet concrete, keeping her bound hands behind her back. Her fingers fumbled in the dark, brushing against cold debris and dirt. Sharp pain flared in her thumb. She found a solid, thick shard of glass. She gripped the edge of the glass tight. She twisted her wrists, pressing the sharp point against the nylon bindings. She sawed the glass back and forth. The rope fibers frayed, popping one by one under the friction. Her arm muscles burned with exhaustion. The sharp glass sliced into her palm, drawing a warm line of blood, but she kept cutting. With one final hard tug, the nylon snapped apart. Brianna brought her hands forward, rubbing her raw wrists. She stood up, her breathing silent and controlled. She needed to level the playing field before the fighting started. She scanned the warehouse ceiling. Rows of rusted iron meat hooks hung from automated tracks. Heavy iron chains dangled near the brick wall. Brianna crept toward the shadows, moving away from the bolted chair. She grabbed a thick chain attached to a swinging hook. The iron felt freezing against her palms. She wrapped the chain around a structural support beam near the central drainage grate, creating a taut tripwire inches off the floor. She grabbed a heavy steel pipe from a nearby debris pile, gripping it like a baseball bat. "Hey!" Brianna shouted. Her voice bounced off the concrete walls. "I'm loose!" The two guards at the entrance turned around. Their yellow eyes glowed in the dim light. They snarled, shifting mid-stride. Their bodies twisted into scarred gray wolves. They charged across the sloped floor, their claws clicking in a rapid rhythm against the concrete. Brianna stood behind her iron tripwire. The first gray wolf leaped forward. Its front paws caught the taut chain. The beast tumbled forward, crashing snout first into the unyielding concrete floor. Brianna swung the steel pipe. The heavy metal connected with the wolf's skull. A loud crack echoed through the room. The creature went limp, sliding across the wet floor. The second wolf swerved, dodging the iron chain. It lunged for her throat, jaws snapping open. Before the beast reached her, a deafening crash obliterated the front entrance. The rusted metal doors crumpled inward like tin foil. A sleek black SUV smashed through the opening, tires spinning and smoking on the wet concrete. The vehicle slammed into the sidewall, pinning the second gray wolf under its steel bumper. The back doors of the SUV flew open. A giant pitch-black wolf leaped into the warehouse, followed by a silver beta carrying a heavy black veterinary bag in his jaws. Nolan and Wyatt had arrived. The rescue mission was over. The war for the city was on. Chapter 22. Nolan's pitch-black wolf form hit the concrete floor, his golden eyes scanning the cavernous room. He saw Brianna standing near the rusted table, holding the steel pipe. Relief washed over the alpha, followed instantly by pure, unbridled rage. He let out a roar that shook the hanging iron meat hooks on the ceiling tracks. Wyatt trotted to Brianna's side and dropped the heavy black veterinary bag at her boots. The silver beta nudged her hand with his wet nose, checking her for injuries. Brianna dropped the steel pipe and unzipped the bag. She packed it hours ago for the trip to the pat grounds, bringing every emergency supply she owned. A slow, mocking clap echoed from the shadows in the back of the warehouse. Garrett stepped into the dim light. He shed his dark leather trench coat, tossing it onto a wooden crate. He didn't look afraid of the black SUV or the two angry wolves standing in his territory. "You brought your beast to my slaughterhouse, Ridge," Garrett sneered. "A fitting place to end your reign." Garrett's spine arched, his bones cracked and snapped in a sickening rhythm. Thick, rust-colored fur erupted across his skin. Within seconds, a monster stood in the center of the room. The rust-colored wolf was a hulking brute, covered in thick battle scars and radiating a foul scent of decaying leaves and dried blood. Nolan didn't wait for the rival alpha to strike first. The pitch-black wolf launched himself across the sloped concrete floor. The two alphas collided with the force of a freight train. Fangs tore into fur, claws scraped against the concrete, sending sparks flying into the air. They rolled across the central drainage grates in a blur of black and rust, snapping jaws and roaring in fury. Wyatt moved to join the fight, but 3 more gray wolves poured out of a side office, blocking the beta's path. Wyatt snarled, diving into the new attackers to keep them away from Nolan and Brianna. Brianna fell to her knees, ripping through the compartments of her black veterinary bag. She ignored the deafening snarls echoing around her. She found a thick glass vial labeled with a bright orange warning sticker. It contained a potent mixture of xylazine, a strong animal sedative designed to drop a 1,000-pound horse in seconds. She grabbed a large-gauge syringe, her fingers flying with practiced precision. She punctured the rubber seal on the vial and drew the thick, clear liquid into the plastic barrel. She pushed the plunger up, flicking the side to clear a tiny air bubble. She capped the needle, clutching the syringe tight in her right hand. 10 feet away, the fight between the alphas turned brutal. Nolan possessed the advantage of speed and lethal precision, landing deep bites on Garrett's flanks. But Garrett fought without honor. The rust-colored wolf kicked his hind legs out, sweeping Nolan's paws out from under him. As Nolan hit the wet floor, Garrett lunged, clamping his jaws around the black wolf's front shoulder. Nolan roared in agony. Blood spilled onto the concrete. Garrett pressed his advantage, using his bulk to pin Nolan down. The rival alpha shifted his grip, aiming his snapping jaws for Nolan's exposed throat. Brianna didn't hesitate. She sprinted across the wet concrete floor, her boots slipping on the slick surface. Garrett saw her coming from the corner of his eye. The rust-colored wolf let out a warning growl, his jaws inches from Nolan's neck. He expected the human to cower. He expected her to run. Brianna dropped to her knees right beside the tangled, fighting beasts. She uncapped the syringe with her teeth, spitting the plastic cover onto the floor. Garrett snapped his jaws at her face, trying to scare her back. Brianna ducked under the snapping teeth. She jammed the thick needle directly into the thick muscle of Garrett's rust-colored neck. She slammed her thumb against the plunger, emptying the entire barrel of the potent animal sedative into his system. Garrett let out a shocked yelp, pulling away from Nolan. The rust-colored wolf spun around, raising a giant paw to swat Brianna across the room. He never completed the swing. The high-grade sedative hit his nervous system like a sledgehammer. Garrett's yellow eyes rolled back in his skull. His front legs buckled. The enormous beast swayed, let out a confused whine, and collapsed onto the concrete floor like a dropped stone. Nolan scrambled to his paws, blood dripping from his shoulder. He stood over the unconscious rival alpha, his chest heaving. The black wolf looked down at Brianna. She knelt on the wet floor, holding the empty plastic syringe, her chest rising and falling in ragged breaths. Across the room, the remaining gray wolves saw their alpha drop. Panic seized the rival pack. They broke off their fight with Wyatt, turned tail, and sprinted out the shattered front doors, fleeing into the city night. Silence returned to the warehouse, broken only by the dripping water and the steady breathing of the victors. The takedown was complete. Chapter 23. The drive back to the Zenith Tower passed in total silence. Brianna sat in the passenger seat of the battered black SUV, staring out the window at the passing city streetlights. The adrenaline left her veins, replaced by a deep, bone-aching exhaustion. Wyatt drove the vehicle, his hands steady on the leather steering wheel. Nolan sat in the back seat, holding a blood-soaked towel against his torn shoulder. Wyatt steered the SUV into the underground parking garage. The tires rolled to a stop. Nobody spoke. They rode the private steel elevator up to the top floor, the mechanical hum sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet car. The elevator doors parted. They stepped into the penthouse hallway and stopped. The heavy oak front door remained a pile of jagged splinters scattered across the dark hardwood floor. The metal hinges hung twisted and useless from the wall frame. The entrance gaped wide open, exposing the ruined living room. Nolan shifted his grip on the bloody towel. He stared at the shattered doorway, a grim expression on his face. "Leave it," he instructed. "Let the broken door stay right where it is. We won't fix the frame until the workers arrive tomorrow. It serves as a reminder." They stepped over the threshold, crunching over the wood splinters. The steel security shutters still covered the floor-to-ceiling windows, keeping the city lights out. Wyatt stopped in the center of the living room. The giant beta turned to face Brianna. He ignored the shattered ceramic bowl and the broken wood-grain kitchen island. Wyatt dropped to one knee on the hardwood floor, lowering his head in a gesture of unwavering, undeniable respect. "You saved the Alpha," Wyatt rumbled, his voice thick with emotion. "You walked into a kill zone, outsmarted the guards, and took down the rival leader with a plastic tube. The pack owes you a debt we can never repay. You have my loyalty until my last breath, Brianna Collins." Brianna felt a lump form in her throat. She stepped forward and rested her hand on his broad shoulder. "Get up, Wyatt. You brought my veterinary bag to a warehouse brawl. We're even." Wyatt offered a weary, crooked grin and pushed himself back to his feet. He walked down the hallway toward his room, leaving Brianna and Nolan alone in the ruined kitchen. Nolan dropped the blood-soaked towel onto the counter. The bite on his shoulder looked deep. The edges of the wound gaped open, sluggishly leaking dark blood down his arm. He leaned against the island, exhaustion carving deep lines into his face. "Sit on the bar stool," Brianna ordered, slipping into her clinical mindset. "I need to clean that before it gets infected." Nolan didn't argue. He climbed onto the stool, wincing as the movement pulled his torn muscles. Brianna retrieved her black veterinary bag from the floor. She pulled out a bottle of sterile saline, a stack of clean gauze, and a surgical stapler. She stood between his knees, wiping the dried blood from his skin with careful, deliberate strokes. The quiet strength of his presence countered the sharp smell of antiseptic. "You could have died tonight," Nolan whispered, staring at the raw, red friction burns on her wrists where the nylon rope bit into her skin. He reached out, gently running his thumb over her injured arm. "When Garrett put that silver blade to your throat, my heart stopped." "He underestimated me," Brianna replied, keeping her focus on the wound. She flushed the bite mark with saline. "He thought I was just bait. He forgot what I do for a living. I know how to handle wild animals." Nolan let out a soft, rough laugh. "You handled him all right. He will wake up in a holding cell with a terrible headache." Brianna paused, holding the surgical stapler. She looked up into his golden eyes. The distance between them vanished, just like it did on the mountain deck. The arrogant billionaire and the hostile roommate were gone. Only the man remained. "Hold still," Brianna murmured. She aligned the stapler and squeezed the handle, closing the deepest part of the wound. Nolan didn't flinch. He just watched her, his gaze burning with a fierce, unwavering devotion. When the wound was clean and closed, Brianna packed her supplies away. She stood in front of him, feeling the exhaustion of the long night pressing down on her shoulders. Nolan reached out, wrapping his good arm around her waist. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against her stomach. He breathed in her scent, letting the reality of her safety ground his raging inner beast. Brianna ran her fingers through his dark hair, finding comfort in the steady beat of his heart. The penthouse was a disaster zone. The door sat in ruins, but standing amidst the wreckage, the pack was finally secure. Chapter 24. A week passed since the brutal battle in the warehouse. The morning sun pushed through the glass storefront of the downtown veterinary clinic, casting long shadows across the waiting room floor. Brianna scrubbed the steel exam table with a coarse sponge, wiping down the surface until her reflection stared back at her. She organized the medical instruments on the tray, checking the stock of gauze and sterile gloves. The familiar, mundane routine brought a deep sense of peace to her racing mind. The war was over, and normal life felt like a luxury. The brass bell above the front entrance chimed a cheerful note. Brianna turned around, expecting a customer carrying a pet carrier or a sick stray cat. Nolan walked into the waiting room. He wore a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, ditching the corporate charcoal suits entirely. He didn't kick the doors open. He didn't shout arrogant orders or demand immediate attention. He held 2 paper cups of hot coffee in one hand and a brown paper bag from the artisan bakery down the street in the other. "Good morning," Nolan greeted, setting the cups on the reception desk. "I brought breakfast." Brianna smiled, stripping off her sterile gloves. She walked over and took a sip from the cup. The rich, dark roast warmed her chest. "Thank you. Did Wyatt try to steal the pastries from the bag?" "He tried," Nolan admitted, leaning against the counter. "I had to remind him that beta wolves don't get human croissants. He is currently pouting on the living room rug." Brianna laughed, opening the paper bag to reveal 2 warm, golden pastries. The dynamic between them felt entirely different. The underlying tension of debts, real estate traps, and billionaire arrogance evaporated. They stood in the clinic as 2 people sharing a quiet morning, stripped of their armor. "The workers finished the new penthouse door yesterday," Nolan mentioned, taking a bite of his food. "It is solid oak, reinforced with a steel core. Nobody is kicking that one down." "Good," Brianna nodded. "I prefer my doors attached to the hinges. The draft was getting terrible." Nolan set his coffee down. He looked around the clinic, taking in the metal cages, the harsh fluorescent lights, the plastic waiting chairs, and the stacked boxes of medical supplies. He ran his hand over the edge of the reception desk. "I received the deed to the neighboring building this morning," Nolan mentioned, his tone casual. "The empty retail space right next door." Brianna paused, her pastry halfway to her mouth. The old defensive instinct flared in her chest, sharp and familiar. "Nolan, if you bought this clinic to force me into some new arrangement, I swear I will walk out." "I didn't buy the clinic," Nolan interrupted, holding his hands up in a gesture of total surrender. "I know better than to mess with your independence. I bought the empty building next door. I am tearing the shared brick wall down and donating the square footage to your boss. You need a larger surgical suite and a dedicated quiet recovery room for the animals. It is a corporate community grant, no strings attached. You keep working here, earning your own paycheck, and running your own life without my interference." Brianna stared at him, the defensive walls in her mind crumbling into dust. He actually listened to her. He supported her dreams instead of trying to purchase her submission with an endless bank account. He understood exactly what she needed to feel equal in their complex partnership. "Thank you," Brianna whispered, stepping around the front counter. Nolan wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her into a tight, secure hug right in the middle of the clinic. The familiar, solid warmth of his chest filled her senses, representing safety and home. Hours later, Brianna finished her long shift and rode her green vintage bicycle back to the Zenith Tower. She pedaled through the busy city streets, the crisp autumn wind blowing through her hair. She parked the bike in the underground garage and rode the private steel elevator up to the top floor. She unlocked the new, heavy oak door and stepped into the penthouse. The steel security shutters were raised, allowing the late afternoon sunlight to flood the open living space. The broken furniture was gone, replaced by comfortable, modern seating. Wyatt lay on his back on the new rug, kicking his paws in the air while chewing on his bright red squeaky toy. Squeak! Squeak! Brianna walked past the giant silver wolf, tossing him a quick belly rub, and stepped out onto the sprawling glass balcony. Nolan stood near the railing, looking out over the glittering city skyline. The sky burned with brilliant hues of pink, orange, and gold as the sun dipped below the towering buildings. Brianna walked up beside him, resting her arms on the cool metal rail. Nolan turned his head, his golden eyes reflecting the vibrant sunset. He didn't speak. He reached out and intertwined his large fingers with hers. The physical contact sent a warm, grounding energy straight to her core, chasing away the chill of the evening air. Brianna leaned her head against his broad shoulder. They stood high above the bustling streets, overlooking the territory they fought so hard to protect. The hostile roommate arrangement was a distant memory. The billionaire alpha found his perfect match, and the stubborn vet tech finally found her pack. They shared the quiet evening on the balcony, staring out at the horizon, true equals in love, respect, and life. The end. Quick favor, don't go anywhere yet. If you thought Brianna was fierce for throwing an arrogant alpha's black credit card right back in his face, wait until you meet the heroine in this next story on your screen. You have to hear this disaster unfold. Click the video on your screen right now. It is pure, unhinged chaos.